Good morning. I'm Dean Sampson, a member of the board, and I'm here this morning, among other things, to give the announcements. On the back of the order of service, you'll find that the annual report is being requested from all the committee members so that we can have a compiled record of everything that was accomplished this last fiscal year, looking for a concise summary of the committee activities. And these can be sent to the office manager if you have an input. That would be very helpful. Next Sunday, on June 9th, there's the flower ceremony and new member recognition service. And so we're encouraging anybody who hasn't already to join, and then we can all participate in the new member recognition. Also on June 9th, next Sunday, is a congregational meeting, and it will immediately follow the service. We'll be voting on our budget for next year, and equally or even more important, we'll be voting on the new members of the board. So we're encouraging maximum attendance. That would be very helpful. There is also an advisory vote on the change of the bylaws for the UUA national organization. That'll occur at the same congregational meeting. On a non-Cedars note, the 2024 Rotary auction is coming around the bend, and they're looking for volunteers. They're always looking for volunteers, and it's a great thing to do, and it's a lot of fun. I've done it for a couple of years. Last year, the auction raised over $800,000, and it's a totally volunteer effort. So you can contact either Jane Martin or Mike Cox for information on how you can get signed up. And finally, on the table right back there, there's a sign-up sheet for the Suquamish Community Kitchen dinners, which Cedars is now participating in. We have had 2 of them that were really quite successful, and there was July 10th, September 11th, November 13th. So you have a lot of time to work that into your plan. Typically it is from 4:30 to 7:30, and they serve 50 to 60, sometimes 70 meals. So it's a large operation, and the more volunteers, the better. Thank you.
Well, it's birthday recognition time again at Cedars. So if there are any people brave enough to have a birthday in the month of June, can you let me know? Stand up, raise a hand. Okay, Mary. Mary and Mary. And oh, okay, we have 3, 4. Okay, well then in that case, yes, if stand up if you would. Jillian, you don't have to stand up. Okay, you can do it. We say friends instead of all the names, okay? Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear friends. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear friends. Happy
Also, next week on June 9th, I know that Dean mentioned that is the flower ceremony, but in there, we forgot to mention, if you have flowers at home in your garden, we encourage everyone to bring a flower with them or multiple flowers with them, as we'll be exchanging them as part of the service. So, It's part of my culture. On a holy night in 1969, in an inn also known as a bar called the Stonewall Inn, a basement which had no running water nor safe fire exits, queer people of many colors and kinds danced together, for it was the only place where they were allowed to dance, at least permitted to, by the mafia who ran the inn. In those days, it was common for the police to frequent this inn. No, not to join in the dance, the underground celebration, but to send those dancers home and make arrests. When they would arrive, the lights would go on and the people would be lined up, and then all of those in drag, all of those who were trans, all of those without proper identification, they were arrested and taken into custody. But on this holy night, that early morning of June 28th, the people said, "Not tonight." As they called them to line up, a trans woman refused to go. And as the police began to beat and arrest them, and as the people spilled out from the bar onto the street, Christopher Street, a crowd grew to watch. And then, as trans women, lesbians, and gay men were getting arrested, a yell came from the crowd, "Gay power!" As a trans woman was shoved, she shoved back, and the crowd began throwing bottles at a wagon. And suddenly it erupted. For once, the people didn't line up. For once, the people said, "No more. We've had enough." It's almost as if that night, being pulled out of the darkness of the underground at Stonewall Inn, one too many times they said, "I'm ready to be seen." On this holy night, when the power of the oppressed rippled through the streets of New York, when queer people said, "No more," our world would never be the same. 55 years ago, to be gay, to be trans, to dance and to love and celebrate and was illegal. And now, only 55 years later, here we are celebrating at a church, gay and straight together, queer and straight together, trans and cisgendered together, all in this together. And so, as we hear stories of life and love and defiance and celebration, let us also remember to pay tribute to our movement's ancestors, many of them trans women of color, who led the first rebellion that night. You see, Pride is a celebration of that anniversary, the anniversary of that riot at the Stonewall Inn in New York City, a holy night. So happy Pride. Welcome to this joyful celebration. Bring your whole selves to this space. Your gay selves, your lesbian self, your bisexual and transgender self, your straight self, your queer self, your drag queen self, your butch and femme self, your cross-dressing, nail-painting, tutu-wearing selves. Bring yourselves into this space, all of your identities that are and will be. Let's have a celebration of who we are, because joy is a rebellion too. And this church, my friends, is queer. Queer and fabulous. Amen? Amen. Amen. Come, Let us worship together.
Thank you, Audrey. Certain philosophers have written many, many words about the concept of authenticity. Martin Heidegger, Soren Kierkegaard, Jean-Paul Sartre. Although even in French, Sartre didn't want the baggage associated with the word authenticity, and the words he used are better translated as good faith. Colloquially, authenticity is a state of being that is effortlessly achieved by every child. Philosophically, children aren't authentic, they are simply naive. Heidegger provides a list of transformations that are required before one can start trying to be authentic. The first is when we feel anxiety at the complete lack of significance of the things in our lives and our lives themselves. This anxiety occurs in the present moment. The second transformation is when we move on from anxiety and self-pity to the realization that the future holds possibility and that death will be the end of all possibility. And the final transformation, Heidegger says, is the recognition that we each have a debt to ourselves. We're each responsible to ourselves, and consciousness tells us that we each need to be consciousness tells us that we are each falling short. The only way to pay the debt is to be the best that we can be. Or as Kierkegaard says, become what one is. Jean-Paul Sartre says that at every moment, each person has a past and a set of characteristics and is living in a society with expectations. It is against this backdrop that one must attempt to be authentic. The bad faith he talks about is precisely the act of filling society's expectations without introspection. To decide to become a thing as if you were a page in a coloring book, just filling in the existing figures with shades of yourself. The path to good faith is in trying to decide what one is by drawing the entire picture. But this might not be achievable, since what one is always augmented by the decision that one made to be what one is. In other words, I am a particular thing, and at the same time, I am the thing that made the decision that I am that particular thing. Ultimately, a person living in good faith Being authentic must be a person who decides to be a thing and at the same time is cognizant of their own uncertainty of what they are. Of these three philosophers, I feel only Kierkegaard lived his philosophy. Sure, Heidegger and Sartre wrote abstruse books, and I always imagine Sartre pretentiously dressed all in black, sitting in a cafe drinking espresso, which might be his authentic way of being. Kierkegaard worked on philosophy because he needed to figure out how to live his life. In fact, cognizant of his own uncertainty, he decided to be a Christian, and this was his Sartrean decision. He would have said that this passionate commitment to something outside of himself was the way that he could create meaning in his life. When I was 16 years old, I started attending a Christian church. This was my attempt at a Kierkegaardian passionate commitment. Church, youth group, I read the Bible on my own, and I wrote poetic prayers in roughly the same style as the verses found in the book of Psalms. I really tried. But I was living in bad faith, since I was trying to be the Christian that society expected, to simply put on a Christian hat by following the Christian examples, not figuring out what it meant to be this thing, not embracing the ambiguity of the human condition, but actually using Christianity to avoid it. I gave up on that path when I was nearly 21 years old. I ultimately felt that the entire effort had been performative. I had finished 2 years of college and had joined the Army Reserve, and then my unit had been activated in support of the first conflict in the Gulf, Operation Desert Shield Storm. Once that was over, I was about to return to school in the fall of 1991, and I realized that I had accomplished nothing. I could label nothing in my life as significant, and I had no friends. I thought I had burned the bridges of my friendships. It turns out that I had only covered them in gasoline and wired them with explosives. Anyway, I felt I had no friends, and I was empty and depressed. However, I had to do something, so I set myself the task of just completing my bachelor's degree in math. And then something happened. I found that I really liked math. It turns out that once you get beyond calculus, it gets really cool. Perhaps this was a passion, and this was the way that I could be the best that I could be. By the end of that school year, I had friends in the department, and even people I didn't know knew who I was. And this person I had become, it was effortless. I had completed my my Heideggerian transformation. I dedicate the lighting of our flaming chalice to the path to authenticity. Please join with me in repeating the affirmation as printed in your order of service. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we will all become the best that we can be.
Our opening hymn today is 1023 in the Teal Book, and this is our new hymn of the month. I think most of you know it, but Audrey's going to play it one time through so we can all remind ourselves of the melody. Then we'll do it as a round. So each group We'll divide in the center here. We'll sing it 3 times as a round, okay? And you come in, the second group comes in where the circle 3 is in the hymnal, okay? So after the first 2 lines. So I'm gonna start the group over here. This will be number 1, you'll be number 2. And can you start us for number 2? Just be conspicuous about it, that's all. Okay, we'll go through it one time first.
The great thing about June, and this being the hymn of the month, is it is a 5-Sunday month. So come the end of the month, we'll have this. So I want to tell a story, and this version of the story comes from my colleague Christopher Busey, but originally is out of an oral tradition from West Africa. It's a story about God's hat. So once upon a time, long ago, there was a village. And everyone who lived in the village got along pretty well. They liked each other and were good neighbors. This village had a road that ran right through the middle of it, dividing it in half, like exactly in half. And no one thought much about it. It was just the road. They never thought of it as any sort of barrier. One day, though, something kind of strange happened. You see, God was out taking a walk, and she came walking right through town. She was wearing this beautiful flowing dress that moved with the wind, and her hair just looked so beautiful. And there on her head, God was wearing a hat. It was a rather interesting hat, and everyone took notice of it. And God just kept walking and went off into the distance. After God disappeared, everyone said, "Did you see her? Wasn't she so beautiful?" "Yes," said one neighbor to the other. "And what did you think of her hat?" "Oh, I loved how blue it was." "Blue? What are you talking about? The hat was most definitely red." "Red? No. From where I was, that hat was blue. There was no doubt about that." "I'm telling you, it was red." The fighting went on, back and forth between these two neighbors. Soon other people from the village joined in. It went on for years. No one could settle this debate. Was the hat red? Was the hat blue? Was the dress blue, or was the dress gold? It's an internet joke. But no one could settle this debate. And in time, people really began to divide over this. And that road that ran right through the middle of town suddenly became a wall. People built a wall, and everyone who thought the hat was blue were on one side, and everyone who thought it was red were on the other. This went on for many years and was escalating and seemed like there was no way to settle it. And then one day, that strange thing happened again, and God came walking into town. But this time, instead of being able to walk right on the road, God had to walk on the top of this big, tall wall the people had erected. When they saw God, the people got excited. Finally, we can settle this debate. And they shouted, God, come here, we have a question. God paused and looked at the people and said, well, what is it? Well, you see, we've been arguing for a while, and last time you came through, you were wearing a hat. Could you tell us what color it was and settle this debate? God looked puzzled. You know, I do remember coming through here many years ago. So think about it. That hat. Oh, yes, that was one of my favorite hats back then. You see, it was blue on one side and red on the other. The people all turned to look at each other. And then, as they were kind of realizing how silly it had been to fight over this all these years, a child among them began to laugh, burst out with laughter. Soon others began to laugh. Then the whole village was laughing, and God continued on her way. And that is our story. I invite you to take a breath with me. To bring your awareness into this moment, to settle your being in whichever way is most comfortable for you. As we enter into a time of collective silence. Blessed are the gender outlaws, those born with violence on the horizon, and those who narrowly, purposefully avoid it through restricted movements and lost opportunities. Blessed are those who are murdered, those who are killed, and those who are so abused that they leave this world far too early. For you have lived your truth boldly, and your life and your memory are a testament, however brief and brilliant you lived on this earth. Blessed are the ones who are themselves despite danger. The price you pay for authenticity is dwarfed by the confidence of your honesty. Blessed are the flawed, meaning blessed are all of us who make mistakes, try faithfully to correct our missteps, and to be persons of integrity in this challenging world. We do our best. We miss relationships, and we build glimmering castles with our friends and our other loved ones in this place where cement stacked upon itself, upon the earth, is gathered, where we gather. Blessed are the allies, the understanding, those who find the best in us and others, for you will be embraced by many who will love you, for you are beloved by all of us. Blessed are the families who changed, who do their best to understand, who keep their perspective but widen it to include others, who have surprised you. For love is your song, and you are fully loved in turn. Blessed are the strivers, the wanters, the creatives, and all of us who just try to be good people in our communities and relationships. We shall build the land that we are now working on. Blessed are all. For all strive, all work, and all want of something. Blessed, blessed, blessed are all of us. For all that we call holy loves us back. May we live and love and share with it, all among us and beyond. Amen.
On many Sundays, we set aside some time for the sharing of joys and sorrows. If you have a joy or a sorrow that you would like to share, please come forward, state your name, and in a couple of sentences, share with the congregation. Pour a little water in the bowls for a joy so that we all may be buoyed up, or place a stone in the bowl for a sorrow so that we may all share your burden. Remember that this part of the service is neither live streamed nor recorded. pour a little more water in the bowl and place a final stone for all of the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, held delicately in our hearts.
Our centering hymn today is 352 in the gray hymnal. Since this is not one I think that many of us know, Audrey's going to play it over once first. And I warn you, it looks simple, but there's several pratfalls in it, so watch it.
Each Sunday, we come together at Cedars and find a stillness. We come together at Cedars and find a silence. And if we continue to provide Cedars with the required resources, then on Sundays, we can continue to seek the essence so that we may all flower. If you are visiting for the first time, please feel free to let the baskets pass you by. You are our guest, and we are happy simply that you are with us today. Would the ushers come forward to collect the offering? Thank you for your gifts.
That was a fun offertory. They're tapping my foot. It was fun. I want to start my sermon with a quote from a 1986 sermon delivered by the Reverend Mark Mosher DeWolf to his congregation, the Unitarian Congregation of South Peel. He says this: "For some people, The messages that they have no right to live are worse than others. I am one of these people. So are some of you. It is something which applies to minorities of all kinds and stripes, and even to some majorities, like the female one. Even when your conscious mind affirms in struggle your right to exist, the social messages creep into your subconscious and kick you in your tenderest spot. End quote. This past Friday, May 31st, or 30th? I don't know. This last Friday, I forget the dates now. The Pride Progress flag was raised over the City Hall in Poulsbo. If you haven't been following Poulsbo city politics in the last few years especially, this is a little bit of a controversial issue in the larger community. Following the hoisting of this flag, rainbow pride banners were put up on light posts throughout the downtown with a text at the bottom that said, Pride Poulsbo, WA. I wasn't there for this flag raising, and I haven't yet had the opportunity to go and see those banners. I haven't gone into Poulsbo in the last few days. But I saw many of the posts that friends and folks from the larger community made on Facebook, the excitement and joy of seeing these banners put up, seeing this flag raised. Following the hoisting of these flags, though, or these banners, it didn't take long for them to be vandalized. In less than 24 hours, someone had come with a knife and slashed many of the banners in downtown. At a time when anxiety around the continued legal recognition of same-sex marriage, continued recognition of my own marriage, when this anxiety is high depending on what cases the Supreme Court takes up, or who will win the next election and what stance will they take. At a time when I worry about my trans friends, my trans family members, people in the wider community that I don't even know. Hell, let's just name it. At a time when I have fear for anyone who lives outside the norms of society or dares to possess a uterus, seeing these banners flown, seeing this celebration happen, felt a little bit like a miracle. In times like these, knowing a flag is being flown and banners are being put on full display feels like a beacon of hope, a light that people can gather around, and at least for a time, rest, celebrate, and be something more than just survival. How quickly hope can be dashed. For some people, the message that they have no right to live, the messages are worse than others. I am one of these people, and so are some of you. At the time that Reverend DeWolf delivered this sermon in 1986, he was offering these words to his congregation who knew at the time that he was dying of AIDS. In a volume of his selected sermons titled A Time to Live, published after his death, Reverend DeWolf speaks with tenderness about his own struggles with the disease, and helped to shed a light on an epidemic that so many at the time feared, and through doing offered pastoral care and presence to both his congregation and himself when commenting on the noted vulnerability of some of his sermons, Reverend DeWolf said this: "Most congregants come to know preachers through the pulpit. Among the diverse activities of parish ministry, it remains the most powerful tool. I have discovered that my most powerful sermons are the ones I most need to hear preached myself." I can only imagine the courage it must have taken to come out so publicly, to come out from the pulpit. So many stories from the lives of gay men at this time are stories about families hiding in shame, stories of individuals dying alone. I have a friend, we call him Uncle Chuck. He's our mine and Elliot's adopted gay uncle. Chuck is in his late 70s now and was one of our people that really taught Elliot and I a lot about queer history. Chuck lived in Chicago during the AIDS crisis. And I remember him years ago telling me a story about feeling so burned out from attending so many funerals that he eventually stopped going. It's not that he wasn't impacted, but the amount of death was so much. Not just for gay men, but for the entire queer community. This was a galvanizing moment. Facing lack of familial support, people turned towards each other. This is reflected in the stories of lesbian women becoming primary caregivers and even hospice nurses for many of the dying. People with no medical training who would tend to these individuals in their home because oftentimes medical professionals would not. If you're not regularly engaged in queer spaces, you should know that there's kind of a long-standing tension, a rivalry even, between gay men and lesbian women. For people to come together in this way and be of support was revolutionary. The kind of revolutionary love and support we need. And when I think about this, and I think about Reverend DeWolf's experience, there are two takeaways that are impressed upon me. The first we've already named: the need for and the power of turning towards each other during difficult times, during times of hardship, to care and love across the divides, to show up in those scary places for our fellow humans, and to be a force of compassion, to suffer with, to endure together, so that the hardship that is being experienced becomes just a little bit more bearable. I mentioned it earlier, but it's really important to remember that in the early days of the AIDS crisis, people were terrified. In some ways, I imagine it must have felt like we did in the early days of COVID. People didn't know how the disease was being spread. Is it through the air? Is it through touching surfaces? Many feared that simply being in the same room might be enough exposure for you to contract the disease as well. And people still showed up despite that fear. I think that is a powerful takeaway for us to remember. But the second takeaway for me is the importance of not letting fear force us to hide. In the LGBTQ plus community, there is a lot of emphasis placed upon the act of coming out. I don't always think that people who haven't gone through this process fully recognize the importance and power this feature of queer culture has. When reflecting on her own experience of coming out, activist and scholar Mandy Carter had this to say: "When I first heard someone ask me, "When did you come out?" I would assume they were asking, when was the first time I slept with a woman? But then, the more that I thought about it, I realized that coming out was less about any sexual interaction. For me, it was about coming out first to myself and owning and claiming with pride that I am a lesbian. Framed in this way, coming out becomes a sort of ritual affirmation of authenticity. It comes after a time of internal thought and wrestling and reflection that eventually spills out into the world. I think authenticity is one of the most important themes for me personally in my life, even beyond my identity as a gay man, to reflect on those things, those deeply held values, who I am, and to let that shine through in the way I move in the world. And knowing how much that has been of value to me, what a healing balm it is, I can't help but wonder, how would Reverend DeWolf's last days been different if he had not come out to his congregation? Not come out as a gay man, not come out as someone who was struggling with AIDS. What would it have been like if so many others of his time, he hid from himself? He hid this from his congregation and those around him. What would have been lost? And yet, as I mentioned, this volume of selected writings, of sermons that he preached to his congregation, without these, I feel my ministry would be very different. Remember years ago when I started seminary, I told some friends, no matter what happens, I just don't want to be the gay minister. By that, I mean I didn't want to be the minister whose job it was to always be waving my pride flag and advocating for every LGBTQ cause. I didn't want to feel like a stereotype or a trope. And yet, as I've been doing this for some time, I've realized that it is impossible for me to separate my identity as a gay man from my ministry. And that being able to come out in this way, in this space, and be authentic in that way has allowed us both, I believe, to grow in new ways. That's what coming out does. It provides a chance for people to live authentically, to be in relationship of care with one another, and to live honestly. My hope is that all of us, no matter how we identify, all have the blessing and privilege of living authentically as ourselves, to come out from our deepest hidden recesses into the world. May it be so, to the glory of life. I'd like to invite us to rise as you are willing and able, as we prepare to join in singing our closing hymn of our service, hymn number 170, "We Are a Gentle, Angry People."
And we'll do all 6 verses, okay?
Please repeat after me as we extinguish our flaming chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
Warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our service has ended, but our service to the world and one another begins anew. May we go forth with the courage to live authentically as who we are in this world. May it be so. Amen.
So this is our moment to honor Alan Miller. And I am very privileged to get to be the one that speaks to this, briefly at least. So I want to ask you, how many of you were members of this church 20 years ago in 2004? Okay. Those of you were here when Alan first became a member of the music committee. 20 years ago. Now we have a little description of the music committee, and I think somewhere in it it says, after 3 years you should retire. Fortunately, Alan did not do that. When I joined the music committee, I became the secretary and took the notes. Alan was the chair, and he remained the chair for much of my time there. And then there was a time when he said, I don't want to be the chair anymore. So, Fran, would you be the chair? So I said, sure, but you've got to be the secretary. So we just switched the jobs, and he's done that ever since. But a few weeks ago at our music committee meeting, he said, I think it's time for me to step off this committee. Well, of course we objected, but you know, there's kind of a limit to how much you can object to somebody that's been on a committee for 20 years. So we said, yeah, but we want you to continue to lead the singing, right? And Alan said, yeah, as long as my voice holds up. So you're still going to get to experience Alan as our song leader from time to time. And I just want to be a representative of all of you in saying a huge thank you to Alan. So I've asked Alan if he would reminisce just a little bit about these 20 years, and he agreed to do that. So he said he could spend, you know, the next couple of hours on this, but I said, I think about 5 minutes will do.
Actually, I'm programmed for 55 minutes, but I'll spare you that. Actually, I don't really feel old most of the time until I look in the mirror, and then it hits me, and then I begin to pay attention to other things. Anyway, when I first attended Cedars, they had a choir, and I was immediately attracted to that because for many years I had not been able to do any part singing, and the next week we joined. So, and unfortunately I got invited to join the choir, which was nice. But anyway, it wasn't too long before our music director resigned, and there was a number of issues, but a big issue was that she had not felt supported properly and had not, by extension, felt appreciated. So some of us got together and decided, well, that's at least something we can do. So we formed a committee, and at first we were not recognized by the board as an official committee, but eventually that happened. And our whole job was to support the music director, whatever she wanted or needed. And just by our existence, she knew that there were some people that were backing her up. And that was basically the idea. Eventually, we became officially recognized, and we helped with the music budget and working all that sort of stuff out. And we were even given the job of recommending the music director's salary and professional expenses and purchasing things like this piano and that sort of thing. We dealt with that. Choir, retreats, whatever was involved with music that we could help with, that's what we did. And all that went along, and it wasn't too much of a problem for us until COVID hit, and we lost our music director, and we weren't finding another one. And that's when, fortunately, by that time, Fran was the chair. And so suddenly, we were doing everything that the music director did. And especially Fran was doing the lion's share of it. So I stopped being chair at just about the right time. Anyway, I don't know why I suddenly decided that I should stop doing this, but 20 years is one of those zero-ending things. Those things need to happen, I guess, about that time. So I don't know why, but I do think it's time. I just felt it was. Anyway, it has been a privilege to be part of Cedars and a part of the committee structure, this committee and other things. And I just want to say that because Cedars is so important to me, and I hope it's important to you, that serving on a committee is not that much of a problem, is not that much work, but it's something that contributes to the ongoing existence of this institution. And it's a very important institution, I think, and I hope it will outlive all of us. Thank you.
So now we're going to have cake and lemonade and goodies in celebration of Ellen. Now I want to note that Audrey's music today was carefully planned. Do you want to explain why? Here.
I think from what I understand, Ellen thinks Bach is the last good composer and the best composer. And he also, I found out, has a hobby of trains, which explains the offertory.
And that will help explain what you're going to see on the cake. Okay, thank you, Ellen.